The city was already awake by 7 a.m., its streets buzzing with honking cars, flashing lights, and people rushing to beat the clock. Inside a tall office building downtown, another day was just beginning at Patterson & Co., a financial consulting firm known more for its fancy suits than its kindness. Mark was one of the first employees to arrive. He stepped off the crowded city bus, his shirt slightly wrinkled and eyes a little tired. His shoes weren't new, but they were clean. Mark never complained. He had a quiet way about him, always polite, always working hard. People barely noticed him, but he noticed everything. He noticed everything. Inside the office, the air was colder, not just from the air conditioning. Mr. Stevens, the boss, arrived minutes later in his shiny black car. He wore a silver watch that probably cost more than Mark's monthly rent. His shoes clicked on the tile floor as he walked in like he owned the world, which, in a way, he thought he did. As Mark walked past with a coffee in hand, Mr. Stevens smirked and said loud enough for others to hear, "Still taking the bus, Mark? That's cute. Maybe one day you'll afford a real ride." And sometimes the ones who mock others for small things are the ones who end up learning the biggest lessons. Mark didn't have much, but he had enough to keep going. After his wife passed away 3 years ago, he became a single dad to his 8-year-old daughter, Lil. Every morning, he made sure she had breakfast, packed her lunch, and got her to school before heading to work. He caught the 6:30 a.m. bus, no matter the weather. Some days were harder than others, but he never missed a shift. He worked as a junior analyst at the firm. The pay was modest, and the hours were long, but Mark didn't complain. He kept his head down, met every deadline, and stayed late when others had already gone home. He didn't gossip or brag, just did his job with quiet focus. Most people barely noticed him, but those who did saw how dependable he was. At home his world was Lily. Their apartment was small but warm. He read to her every night, helped her with homework, and saved every spare dollar for her future. He didn't care much about cars or status. All he wanted was to give her a better life. Mr. Stevens, on the other hand, seemed to have everything. He drove a sleek silver sports car, wore designer suits, and talked loudly about his vacations and wine collection. But for all his wealth, there was something missing: kindness. He judged people by what they wore, how they spoke, and what they drove. To him, someone like Mark didn't matter. Stevens called him basic, cheap, and forgettable. Once Stevens joked that if Mark ever drove a real car, it'd be the end of the world. Mark never responded, not because he didn't care, but because he chose peace over pride. He knew who he was. He knew what mattered. Every time he looked at the worn photo of Lily on his desk, he reminded himself, "This is why I keep going." People like Mr. Stevens saw buses and thought failure. Mark saw the same buses and thought, "Thank goodness I can still get to work, still provide, still show what some call weakness, others call strength." And the strongest ones don't always shout. Sometimes they just keep moving forward. A big deal was on the line. Patterson & Co. had been chasing a massive client for months, a corporate partnership that could bring in millions and boost their name across the industry. The final pitch meeting was scheduled for Friday morning at 9 a.m. sharp. The client's team would fly in just for this. Everything had to be perfect. Mr. Stevens, of course, was leading the meeting. He made sure everyone knew it. "This is our moment," he said with a grin, clapping his hands in the conference room earlier that week. "Don't mess it up." Most of the team would be running reports and logistics, but Mark was given a special task: assisting Mr. Stevens directly. It was surprising, considering how little respect the boss gave him, but the truth was, even Mr. Stevens knew Mark was good at what he did. Reliable, sharp, always on time. So Mark spent the next few days putting together the data, prepping the slides, and making sure every detail was correct. He stayed late, checked everything twice, and even came in early the day before to make sure the presentation was ready. Mark got up before sunrise, made Lily breakfast, and caught the 6:15 bus to beat the morning traffic. It was cold outside, and the bus was packed, but he didn't mind. He had his folder with all the presentation materials clutched tightly in his lap. This meeting mattered, not just for the company, but for him. It was his chance to prove himself. Across town, Mr. Stevens was getting ready too. He adjusted his silk tie in the mirror, and smiled at his reflection. "They're lucky to have me," he muttered. He strolled out to his luxury car, pushed the start button, and felt the engine roar. As he pulled out of his driveway, he laughed to himself, and said, "Imagine relying on a bus. I'd rather walk barefoot." He didn't bother checking the traffic. He assumed the road would clear for him, the same way he assumed success was always waiting. But sometimes the world doesn't care about plans. As Mark's bus rolled steadily down its route, he watched the sun rise behind the city skyline, unaware of what was coming. And miles away, as Mr. Stevens hit the freeway with music blasting, and confidence high, something small, something he didn't see coming, began to shift. Because when you think you're untouchable, life has a way of proving you wrong. At first, everything was fine. Mr. Stevens cruised down the freeway, humming along to the radio, sipping his overpriced coffee. The sky was clear, and the city looked golden in the morning light. He had no doubt he'd walk into the office right on time, maybe even 5 minutes early, just enough to make a grand entry. Then, about halfway to downtown, his car jerked. Once, then again, a strange grinding sound came from the engine. "What now?" he muttered, annoyed. He tapped the dashboard like that would help. The car gave one last sputter, and then died. Completely. He cursed and pulled over to the shoulder, glaring at the warning lights blinking on the dashboard. He turned the key again. Nothing, just a sad clicking sound. His fingers scrambled for his phone. He called roadside assistance. They said they'd send someone, but with rush hour traffic and morning calls backed up, it would take at least 45 minutes. "Are you kidding me?" he shouted into the phone. "Do you know who I am?" But no one cared. Not this time. The meeting was in 23 minutes. Back at the office, Mark had already arrived. The bus had been a little crowded, but it came right on time. Mark even had a few minutes to grab coffee from the break room and straighten his tie. The folder with all the meeting materials sat neatly in his hand. He took a deep breath, calm and focused. Upstairs, the clients had arrived early. 3 well-dressed executives sat waiting in the conference room, checking their watches. They looked serious, impatient. A receptionist popped her head in and whispered to Mark, "The boss isn't here yet. They want to start soon." Mark nodded. "Let me know if they ask for anything." Meanwhile, Mr. Stevens was still stuck on the side of the road, pacing back and forth, waving his phone in the air like better signal would fix the engine. He called the office. "Where's Mark?" he snapped when someone picked up. "He's here, sir," they replied. Mr. Stevens gritted his teeth. "Tell him to stall. I'm on my way." But time doesn't wait, and clients don't either. The lead client stood up and said, "If we're not starting in 3 minutes, we're leaving." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Mark, who sat near the projector. Because sometimes, when the person in charge disappears, the one who's been overlooked the whole time becomes the one who steps up. Mark stood quietly for a second. He looked at the room full of important clients, then at the empty chair at the head of the table, where Mr. Stevens should have been. His hands gripped the folder just a little tighter. Then he took a step forward. "Good morning," he said, his voice steady. "I'm Mark, part of the team that's been preparing this project. Ms. Stevens has been delayed, but I'd be happy to get us started so we don't waste your time." The clients exchanged glances, unsure, but the lead executive gave a small nod. "Go ahead." His tone was calm, his words clear. He didn't try to impress them with fancy language or big promises. He just told the truth. He explained the strategy, the numbers, the research. He had done most of the work anyway. Late nights, early mornings, checking the details over and over. Now, all of it came pouring out naturally. He answered every question with quiet confidence. He didn't boast, he didn't rush, and the room changed. The clients started leaning forward, nodding. One of them whispered to another, "He really knows his..." Another took notes quickly, eyebrows raised in surprise. Mark kept going, steady as ever. He wasn't trying to steal anyone's spotlight. He was just doing what he always did, his job. But for the first time, people were actually seeing him. Then, halfway through the meeting, the door swung open. Mr. Stevens rushed in, his tie crooked, face red, sweat on his forehead. "I'm so sorry," he huffed, trying to catch his breath. "Car trouble. Absolute nightmare." He looked around, expecting chaos, but instead he saw calm. The clients were fully engaged. Mark was at the front, finishing his point, like he'd been in charge the whole time. The room was silent for a beat. Then the lead client said, No worries, Mark has been handling it beautifully. Mr. Stevens blinked. He gave a tight smile and sat down quietly, not saying much for the rest of the meeting, because in that moment, it was clear, respect isn't something you demand, it's something you earn, and Mark had just earned it, not with power or pride, but with preparation, heart, and quiet strength. The meeting ended with firm handshakes and satisfied smiles. The clients were impressed, not just with the proposal, but with Mark. They even asked for him to be involved directly in the project going forward. Back at his desk, Mark didn't brag, he just quietly filed the notes, sent a follow-up email, and went back to work, like it was any other day, but it wasn't. Something had shifted. Later that afternoon, Miss Stevens walked by Mark's desk. He stopped for a moment, looked down and said softly, "Good work today, Mark." Really, it wasn't much, but it was something, and from a man like Stevens, it was more than anyone expected. Over the next few weeks, people began to notice small changes. The boss wasn't as quick to make jokes at others' expense. He listened more, he asked for input instead of just giving orders. He even took the time to say thank you when someone stayed late, or went the extra mile. And Mark, he didn't change at all. Still brought his daughter's drawing in his lunch bag, still helped others quietly, without needing credit. But now people noticed. Coworkers greeted him with more warmth. Some asked for his opinion on projects, others just smiled more when he passed by. Miss Stevens even walked with him to the elevator one day and said, "You know, I used to think success meant always being in control, but sometimes the strongest person in the room is the one who's been overlooked the most." Mark simply nodded. He didn't need to say much. He never, because in the end, respect isn't about status, or what kind of car you drive. It's about how you treat people, how you show up when it matters, and how you carry yourself when no one's watching. And sometimes, life has a funny way of flipping things around. The one who's mocked for taking the bus might just be the one who drives the whole team forward, with quiet strength, steady hands, and a heart full of purpose. It's a reminder to never judge someone by their shoes, their ride, or their silence, because kindness costs nothing, and karma always keeps the receipt.